Good evening. We welcome you to the Community Awareness Committee's panel discussion on homelessness this evening. Our topic this evening is homelessness. I am Trish Steiner, Chair of the Community Awareness Committee. The Community Awareness Committee is a committee of the Neighborhood Safety Commission. The Neighborhood Safety Commission is comprised of 15 individuals who are appointed by the chairman and the district commissioners. It is the policy of the Community Awareness Committee to not discuss any particular individuals, incidents, or any past or present cases. We welcome and thank you for attending this evening and welcome those of you who are watching on Cobb TV. We have cards available for written questions. Please raise your hand and we will collect your questions throughout the discussion this evening. Please turn your cell phone off or on silent as your phone will interfere with our live broadcasting. Thank you. Our moderator this evening is Joel Cope. Joel is an attorney whose practice is in trial litigation. He has been a practicing attorney for 20 years. He currently serves on the Neighborhood Safety Commission and was elected to serve as secretary. He serves as the president of the Mableton Improvement Coalition and president of the Mableton Community Fund. He has also served as secretary and president of his HOA. Joel will now introduce our distinguished panel members to you this evening. Thank you, Joel.
All right, thank you. As Trish said, my name is Joel Cope, and I'll be the moderator of this evening's discussion, which is about homelessness in Cobb County, and I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. As she said, we have several audiences here. We have the folks that are out here in the crowd. We also have people watching us on Cobb TV as well as online, and so we're very excited to bring this panel to you. We have several people that I'd like to introduce to our panel members, to our audience here, and I want to do so now. And what I'll do is have each one of them give a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to go into the question and answer session of our program. As was explained by Trish, we asked these questions by way of index cards. We've already received some input online as well for questions so that you'll know that these are coming from the audience. One other thing I want to mention for the benefit of our audience as well is that this is a panel designed to provide education on the topic of homelessness. We don't set policy here. So we're just basically trying to educate people on the issue of homelessness as it exists in Cobb County and all its different facets. And we've brought to you a panel tonight that addresses the issue of homelessness from very different angles. And I'd like to introduce our panelists here in no particular order. Barry Morgan is the solicitor for Cobb County. We also have Catherine Preston of the Georgia Alliance in Homelessness. We have Rachel Castillo of Must Ministries, Camilla Worrell of Family Promises, Darlene Duke of Sweetwater Missions, Jerry Barr of the Center for Family Resources. We also have Naomi, who will be with us this evening, and later on, Major Jeff Patelis of Precinct 1 of the Cobb County Police Department. So as you can see, we have a very diverse, very broad cross-section of expertise in the area of homelessness. And what I'd like to do is, without further ado, begin with Mr. Morgan. If you would just introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll kind of go across the dais.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here tonight. As it was mentioned, I'm Barry Morgan. I'm the Solicitor General of Cobb County, and if you don't know what that is, that's probably a good thing. We're a prosecutor. Everybody knows about the District Attorney, but the Solicitor General is responsible for the prosecution of all misdemeanor-only offenses, traffic offenses that occur in Cobb County, Georgia. And so how we're impacted by the homeless situation in Cobb County is that many of the cases that we see with folks who are without home involve criminal trespass, involve criminal damage to property. It involves public intoxication. So many of those types of cases taking up spaces in our jail and trying to get folks to resources that they need. One of the things that we've been instrumental in trying to do for the past several years, and hopefully by January of 2018, we will have a mental health court in state court. We don't have one, Superior Court does, but we don't have one. So we've been working to do that over the course of the last couple of years so that we can address some of the issues of our homeless population who have mental illness issues, so that we can address those, move them to situations that can better serve them than simply housing them in our jail.
All right. Thank you so much. Ms. Preston.
I'm Catherine Preston, and I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Alliance to End Homelessness, and we happen to be housed here in Cobb County. Although we work with over 1,000 providers across the state of Georgia. And we are a membership organization, and we work with emergency, prevention, and sheltering organizations across the state. And we work in a collaborative manner to work with communities to help them address issues and gaps in the services for their homeless populations and those people who are at risk.
All right. Thank you so much. Ms. Barr?
Good evening. Thank you very much. I appreciate being here. I'm Jerry Barr, the CEO for the Center for Family Resources. The organization has been around since 1960, providing services to low-income families and/or homeless families. I have been there for 32 years, so I have quite a history of working with the folks in our community, and thoroughly enjoy the work that we do because we can see making some significant changes with the families with whom we work. We look at working with families by helping them stabilize and stay in the home. We help with rent assistance so they can stay in the homes where they are, or if they're homeless, we help them through a period of time to gain the skills and the resources they need to then become stabilized and move out on their own. Over the years, we've had about an 80% success rate of families that we're helping with their rent assistance staying in the place where we help them at least 6 months later. And with the folks that go through our homeless program, 80% of them are able to move out into stable housing and be able to take care of their families. So what we're helping are these families become self-sufficient and stable so that they're paying rent, they're paying mortgage, they're buying groceries, they're paying for services, they're paying taxes, and being contributing members of the community.
Thank you so much. Ms. Duke?
Hi, I'm Darlene Duke. I'm the Executive Director at Sweetwater Mission in Austell, Georgia. And much like Jerry, we have the stabilization services for families, homeless prevention, where we provide financial aid to help people not slip into that homelessness, not be evicted. We also have a very unique program with United Way of Greater Atlanta in helping families that have children, homeless families that have children in the school system, to work with that family to get them housed so that those children can remain in that school of origin, which is really critical to their school environment. It's just a wonderful program with a lot of partners in the county. So that's a great homeless program. And then we just also assist those folks that are living out in the woods and they need basic needs: food, tents, sleeping bags. We don't have a shelter in our immediate area down there in South Cobb. So we do have a lot of folks that we don't see as many as, say, Must Ministries because of the shelter there. But there are still folks that are living along the creek banks, and we see them quite regularly.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Ms. Castillo?
Hi, I'm Rachel Castillo. I'm Must Ministries Vice President of Program Services and provide oversight to a lot of Must programming, including our basic needs programming that we have in Smyrna and in Marietta that provides assistance with clothing and food and basic needs. I also provide oversight to Must Housing, and that includes a myriad of programs, one that begins with our emergency homeless shelter. From there, we offer programs such as tenant-based rental assistance, which helps what Jerry was speaking about, that long-term sustainability in the community. Rapid rehousing, which provides that same long-term sustainability. We also have a unique program called permanent supportive housing, which addresses those needs of the community where, for some reason, whether it's an addiction issue or a mental health issue, they're not able to sustain on their own. So MUST provides them with wraparound case management in an apartment so that they can have a full life and be contributing to our county also. We also provide outreach services to address some immediate basic needs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Naomi, would you like to say a few words? Or
I actually think I'm going to introduce Family Promise first.
Wonderful,
And then
wonderful.
I'll introduce Naomi. So my name is Camilla Worrell, and I'm the Executive Director with Family Promise of Cobb County. We hosted our first family in 2014. We're kind of a unique organization in that we are what we call ourselves a community response to homelessness. We partner with congregations. We currently have 22 Cobb County congregations who provide provide the actual physical shelter, provide volunteers for us, and provide the rebuilding of community supports for families here in Cobb who are experiencing homelessness. One of our requirements is that you have to have a child under the age of 18. And we started in 2014. We're one of the youngest organizations that represented up here. And since then, we've, I think, built a wonderful community response to this overwhelming need. We have over 800 volunteers, again, 22 local congregations. Last year, over 738 families applied for our unique services. And we sheltered 18 families last year. We actually have the honor of having one of our Family Promise graduates here tonight, Naomi, who was really interested and wanted to make sure that her fellow neighbors heard her voice about what it was like to experience homelessness here locally in Cobb, and kind of how she was able to really make her way out of that. And so I'd love to introduce Naomi now.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Naomi again, and my family has experienced homelessness twice. The first time was 2011, and we stayed at Bus Ministries, the Elizabeth Inn, and we did that for maybe 2 months. And the second time was 2015, where we stayed in the Family Promise program. And I think that I kind of give maybe a different face, because when people think about homelessness, they might think about some other people who need like a lot of services, the wraparound services, and they might have the mental health issues or the addiction issues. But my situation was just a situational poverty. And I think that with the state of the economy, more people are finding themselves in my position where they might just have a gap. For me, it was my pregnancy, my last pregnancy. I was out of work for an extended amount of time. I wasn't getting paid. I had 4 to 5 months of bills, but I had, I didn't have any income for a while. So I just needed a boost. And Family Promise was a dynamic, fantastic resource for my family. So I had a job the entire time. I'm a teacher. I teach in Cobb County. So a lot of my students, in fact, when I was staying in Family Promise, there are people that I actually know. I've been their teacher before. So it's a unique position for me to be in. It was humbling, but I'm grateful for the opportunity, because I understand things from multiple perspectives. So that's what I have to say.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and being here tonight. I think it's very generous of you to offer your story to the rest of us, and I appreciate you doing that. And thank you, Ms. Burrell, for also bringing it to us. Thank you so much. As I mentioned to the panels before we got started, we try to ask questions that are going to be able to be addressed by all the members of the panel as much as possible, and we'll try to mix up a little bit so everybody gets a chance to have their turn. One of the things I think we need to do, though, to begin the conversation is to actually define the term. Now, I know that people think that defining the word homelessness or homeless is probably as obvious as who's buried in Grant's tomb, but it's really not. It's actually quite a complicated question. Maybe it's legal, maybe it's not legal, but I'd like for each one of our panelists to provide a definition of homelessness. It could be just the legal version, it could be the legal, or it could be the one that is used in your particular office or your particular ministry. So I will start with you, Mr. Morgan, and work our way across the dais.
I think for the perspective of the court system, someone who is, without a permanent residence, that doesn't have a place to go, and is depending on either family, friends, or the outside to provide shelter.
Okay, all right, thank you. Ms. Preston?
Okay, here we go. You just asked the difficult question, and that is because in the state of Georgia, as well as all across the United States, we have two definitions of homelessness. One being the one that HUD, Housing and Urban Development, acknowledges, which generally is someone who's living in substandard housing, who is out on the street, has had multiple times of homelessness, and can be living in substandard housing. They can be living in we have in Catoosa County, Georgia, we have some people living along the Catoosa River in caves. We have families that have been residing there. If you are living in a situation like that, then you fall into that definition. And those are the ones that we generally count when we do homeless counts across the state of Georgia. However, there's a group of us who are working with families and children, and the definition for those is the McKinney-Vento definition, which means that it may be families, children that are doubled up, tripled up, that are living in the hotel motels, that are in situations like that. And many times they are overlooked and are not counted in a lot of the numbers that we're seeing out there. So it just all depends for us on who we're working with. And right now we have a real big push, and we're advocating on behalf of the families, children, unaccompanied youth, and then the aging, underserved adults.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Ms. Barr?
Well, Catherine hit the nail on the head. It really depends on your funding source. Your funding source determines the definition of who your homeless population is. And HUD has one definition, McKinney-Vento has one definition. If you have private funding, you can have another definition of who you can serve, but it depends upon your funding source. Usually, most of us have to serve the person who's in substandard housing. We cannot address the folks that are doubled up. Now, the school systems, when they count who's homeless, and we have about 2,000 homeless kids in both the Cobb and Marietta school system, they can count families that are doubled up. And we've just started a new program working with Marietta High School and their new Student Life Center, and we've had to find private funding to be able to address working with those homeless families because they don't fit the HUD definition for which we have funding to work with them. So it's a funding issue at this point in time for describing homeless.
Okay, all right. Ms. Duke?
Exactly right. Our Kids Home Initiative program, funded by United Way, is actually directed at those, the McKinney-Vento definition. There is no permanent stable housing. They may be living with grandma in the basement. You know, they may be in a weekly rental situation. They may be doing a combination of a lot of those things where when they have some funding, they're paying for the motel, and then they're on Aunt Susie's couch for a couple of weeks and maybe a night in the car, but generally there is a shelter. You know, it's not children in the school system literally living under bridges, but they just don't have that permanent stability, which causes them to move that child out of the school into another school. We're very fortunate in that most of our funding is private funding outside of the United Way with that program. Most of our homeless prevention services, and we're kind of the call-to guy for I need money to put a family in a motel. School social workers call us a lot because we do have funding for that a lot of other agencies don't, because there is no good follow-up and outcomes, which grant funding kind of prefers, because when you put someone in a motel for a week or two, you really don't expect a great outcome sometimes. But occasionally it's to get into another program. So because of our funding sources being through United Way and then a lot of private funding, we kind of try to fill that gap
Okay, all
on the homeless issue.
right, thank you. Ms. Castillo?
MUST is funded heavily by the Housing and Urban Development, and so we do utilize that definition for most of our programming. And it's going back to what was said, that it's a place not meant for human habitation. So if they're living on streets and park benches, in cars, you know, we don't have any caves, thankfully, that we have to go in and look for, but we use that one. And to introduce another definition, there's a term called chronically homeless, and MUST also works with the chronically homeless with our veterans program here in Cobb County and those permanent supportive housing programs I was speaking of. And what it means to be chronically homeless means that you've been homeless for a year or more consecutively, or you have a continual ongoing struggle with homelessness. So over the course of the last 4 years, you've had 3 or more episodes, and those episodes have added up to more than a year of homelessness. So that's another definition that we use, chronically homeless.
Okay, great, thank you. Appreciate that. Ms. Royal?
So most of Family Promises funding is private, but that's the great thing about going last. I think the thing that unites all of us is that the population of homeless people, or homeless people who are experiencing homelessness, that unites us is that they don't have a home. And especially here in Cobb County, we're reaching the level where affordable housing, no matter what population you're talking about, is rapidly becoming a dream. It's something that we're talking about, but people can't access and they can't find. So it means that there's roughly around 2,300 children in Cobb schools, Cobb and Marietta schools, who fit that definition of homeless. There are college students that are Georgia colleges are struggling to figure out how they are addressing homelessness. It is a community-wide problem, and it gets down to the fact that we do not have enough housing in the pipeline to service, or for everyone who wants housing, who can try to afford to pay for something, to be able to access that housing. And that really, I think, is the definition that unites us. And I think everybody on this panel, if we asked, really what's the thing that's sort of keeping all of our people from accessing housing, it would be the lack of affordable housing and their people's ability to get into it.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, I know a couple of you mentioned McKinney-Vento. Could you explain what that is for members who may not be familiar with that term? Is it a bill? Is it an act? Is it a state program?
McKinney-Vento is, it's an act that was incorporated out of Washington, and it came up when, and it was presented by McKinney and Vento. And it occurred right after a woman was found dead on the steps of the state capitol. And so at that point in time, they began issuing and forming money that would go into the school systems, and that would be mainly focused towards families and children. And it is the only fund that we have. It's also coupled with our Title I funding that goes into the school systems. And I think everybody would be extremely surprised, as I was, that Cobb County has over 40, I think it's 41, 42 Title I schools. And to be a Title I school, that means that you have a level of students in your system that are at poverty level and below. So that's a real wake-up call for our county to understand that. And so those are dollars that come in to the systems that can provide additional help for the children. They can, and families. They have teachers. They have educational liaisons. They're required by law to have a liaison in every one of the school systems to serve these children. They are required by law. There's certain things that they have to do. They cannot deny a child being enrolled in the school system if they don't have all the paperwork right when they walk in the door. They have to give certain time. Also, children can remain in their school if it is deemed, and the family has to move to another, and I'm sure Camilla deals with this a lot. If the family is not in that school zone, but it's deemed in the best interest of the child to remain in their school system, then they have to allow that child to remain in that school system, and they have to assist with transportation, get the child there. So a lot of our shelters and organizations are dealing with that as well, because we have to work real closely with our school systems when we work with families and children, because they are an important part of this whole
Easy for you to say.
of this whole complicated puzzle that's out there. So McKinney-Vento comes basically through Department of Education down to the states, and the other or through HHS, and the other comes through HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development. HHS is Health and Human Services.
Okay, and also I heard, oh, sorry, Ms. Barr?
say something?
Certainly, of course.
Because you have a representation here of a number of programs here in Cobb County, and we have over probably a dozen organizations that work with the homeless. We know one another very well, and we know what each one of us can and can't do with our funding sources. So we also know then who we can reach out to serve the folks that come in our door that we can't serve. And we're very fortunate in Cobb County to have organizations that work as collaboratively as we do, and with the school system as well.
Okay, thank you. I heard the term wraparound services. What does that mean?
So with our case management program, it essentially means that you're going to assess the client, you're going to address what are their barriers to housing stability. And then what you do is you meet them and match them with service providers, kind of the way Jerry was saying, but not opposed to their housing, but whether it is they need to get over to the Cobb CSB and have a mental health screening, have they got their basic benefits like their food stamps? Is there a disability present? Do we need to have that disability diagnosed so that they can search for a source of income? Is there a single mother who is not receiving their child support benefits? Do they have a physical health issue? So looking at the person holistically and then wrapping every possible service that you can around them to address all of these issues, which one of them very well might be the root cause of their homelessness, and addressing all of those barriers so when they leave the program, they're going to be able to have that self-sufficiency.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Now, there's some commonly held beliefs and some things that people think about homelessness, and I wanted to run these past our panel and kind of get your thoughts. One is homelessness is an issue that only downtown Atlanta deals with, and as long as I don't go to downtown Atlanta, there's no issue of homelessness, period. Cobb's immune from that.
Ooh.
All right.
Atlanta is making great strides in reducing the number of homeless folks in Atlanta because they've come to Cobb County. Truly, our numbers are rising, theirs are lowering. And that is an unfortunate side effect when a city attacks a problem and doesn't have wonderful solutions, and none of us have wonderful solutions. We all have small solutions that we try to, work on small amounts. But the homeless numbers in Cobb County, are up. And it isn't an urban problem. It is a suburban problem. Like this lovely lady over here. It's circumstantial. It is not just and only people with mental health and substance abuse issues. People fall into homelessness because they're living paycheck to paycheck, and it doesn't take but one little incident to toss them over the edge, and they're evicted. And once that happens, it is a spiraling effect on the road back to recovery. It is really, really hard time.
Okay, well, so if I can see that we have a homeless issue in Cobb County, it must affect just South Cobb. So East Cobb, North Cobb, West Cobb don't have any homeless people in them, right?
I would love to. I was going to say I would love to jump in on this one. So what I've seen is Cobb County is a great place to live. It has great schools. It offers great employment opportunities. Well, that calls to everyone. But it doesn't mean, once people get here, that the plan that they have is actually going to work out. So whether that is the apartment that they're renting, I've seen your child get sick. You might not have an employer that is particularly open to you missing out on a lot of days of work because your child is sick and often in the hospital. I've seen that with families that come into us often with a sick child. You might get a divorce. And so your plan when you were here, or the plan that worked here in Cobb County, was based on a two-parent income. And now on a one-parent income, you no longer can afford to live here. You're a college student who thinks that you're going to get that job right away, and that doesn't work out. It's not about the area. It is really about the lack of affordable housing because people do not have options when their income, depending on where their income level is. And so the idea that it might just be a regional problem or a city problem, it misses out on all the people who are here trying to make their lives work.
When I say that you raise an interesting point, Ms. Moreau, because another misconception or conception some people have is that if you're homeless, it's because you want to be. It's a lifestyle. You choose to be off the grid. You don't want to be caught up in society with all that entails. Is that true?
No. 48%, was a study that we did, 48% of the homeless population is employed, gainfully employed. They're working for poverty wages. And it would take them, they would have to work approximately, I think we have figured out 16 to 18 hours a week at their wages to be able to afford housing, to, you know, a two-bedroom apartment with the childcare, with all of the other resources that come with it. And then to answer what everybody was saying, I hear it because I work statewide, and I was just at the state capitol yesterday, and I had to sit there on my hands as they began to, the state legislature is starting a a committee to study homelessness, the Senate is. And one of the things was that someone got up there and said was, all these counties around us, Cobb County, Clayton County, everybody's sending everybody to Atlanta. So I will tell you, there's three different Georgias. There's North Georgia, there's South Georgia, and then there's Atlanta. So that's something else that, and I think that in my mind and what we're hearing, because we have a 1-800 homeless resource line, and we don't compete with United Way 211. As a matter of fact, we work in partnership with them because we handle strictly the homeless. And we have all the homeless providers mapped across the state. And one of the things so we hear a lot of things. What I can tell you is that homelessness is on the rise. And a lot of it is because we've lost a lot of the apartments that were that had the tax credit properties. Those have expired, so now landlords have jumped up on the rent, particularly, I don't know if I want to say this or not. I grew up in Cobb County, so I think I can say this, but particularly around the Cumberland area right now, there were a lot of tax credit properties around there. We're having a lot of people call us from that area who are being kicked out because they can't qualify because the rents have increased so much. It's just, but it's all over the state. It's happening.
Well, here's another thing you hear. Well, if you're homeless in Cobb County, it's because you have a mental health diagnosis. If you're homeless, ergo, you have a mental illness, period. Is it that simple?
It's not that simple. And there's a couple of things. You know, one of the things that we looked at, we do an annual what's called a point in time count, and we did one for Cobb County. And one of the things that we saw on there was that 23% of the clients that participated in that survey had some college, and 45% of those clients had graduated from high school, and that we already heard the employment statistic. So these are not all persons who have mental health issues that are struggling. These are persons that for whatever reason, circumstance in their life, have found themselves in this situation. And, you know, and I appreciate what you said, Deborah, about the Atlanta, but what I can tell you during that point in time survey too, was that 52 people out of the 102 that were surveyed have lived in Cobb County for more than 5 years. This is not what we see, people just coming into Cobb County and becoming homeless. These are Cobb County residents who are becoming homeless. And one of the things that we've seen firsthand, when they sign in daily for our Elizabeth Inn shelter, we asked them, what is your reason for homelessness? 34% of them answered they had no more resources to cover their increasing rents, whether it was in the hotel, when the hotel people were increasing the weekly rental amounts, or it was the apartment complexes when their lease were coming up for renewal, they're looking for a new tenant base, and they don't want this tenant base that they had previously. 34% lost their homes in Cobb County due to not having enough available resources to cover the rent.
All right. Well, I think some of you touched on this too tonight, the fact that people who are homeless can often be very well educated, come from professional backgrounds. They're not, it just kind of blows the stereotype, I guess, people might have. Is that a fair statement based on our panel's impressions? Okay. Well, here's another one. Homelessness is a law enforcement problem. If we see them begging for money, just lock them up. That'll solve the problem. Agree with that?
No, I don't. I think it is a community issue, and the resources, because quite honestly, the jail should be reserved for the people who deserve to be there, who've committed the very serious crimes, and we need that space for those people who've earned to be there. I don't think simply because you're homeless, you've earned your way into the jail. population. I think it is a collaborative effort. We do need to find affordable housing. We need to find a way to get the folks to the services that they need, and that's why we've got such great partners here in the county. But no, it's not. It shouldn't be that we just lock them up and throw away the key. That's not going to resolve the problem.
Does the Solicitor General's office have a specific approach when dealing with people who are arrested and brought to their office, their cases are brought before your office?
Well, in many respects, we don't know their situation when the case comes to our office, and unless a defense attorney who may be appointed to the individual brings that to our attention, we may never know that the individual is without a home. Unless it's a person that we've seen before and we were given that information, but it's probably not something that we're going to know unless it's brought to our attention.
Is there a sort of a diversion program basically where if you have a defense attorney involved, that they can talk to the court, talk to the solicitor and say, can we not work something out for my client to go X route?
Yes, I mean that's always available, and certainly something that we would welcome for the defense attorney to do. Many times they're appointed and they're not given very many resources as well. But if they're on top of things and they can provide us with an alternative resolution, perhaps getting them to one of our partners here tonight, and at least move to a place where they're not having to resort to committing the types of crimes that get them into our court, then yes, certainly that's what we would love to do.
I know that Cobb has some accountability courts, and I think some of you alluded to those earlier tonight, like the Veterans Court, the Mental Health Court, things like that. How would a homeless person interface with that process?
As I stated earlier, most of those courts are in Superior Court, and I mean, when you've committed a felony, there are many resources that come to play. As I said, in our court, we're looking to we have expanded our diversion program and trying to get folks into a better situation, but we're also looking at the mental health court as well, so that we can get folks to the services that they need.
Do the courts have a formalized process of working with other agencies, such as you see here on the dais? Is there sort of a council or a study group or a task force of some type?
Many of the accountability courts in Superior Court do have boards that advise them and partner with various agencies around. We have a DUI accountability court that partners with a nonprofit as well to seek services for individuals who, have an addiction to alcohol, drugs, or whatever bring them to our doors.
Okay. And how do you work with people who may not have an attorney, who may be homeless, that come before you because they've committed a misdemeanor offense?
Typically, someone who is with us from a homeless situation is going to be able to have the services of an appointed attorney. The court is going to appoint someone for them to address their needs. We have a system in state court where practicing attorneys are a part of a appointed system, so they're available. We actually have every Wednesday, we have a jail calendar where we assess the people who've been in on a misdemeanor case for more than 10 days. And there's a defense attorney there, there's a prosecutor there, the judge is there at the jail, and they work together to resolve the cases that appear on that calendar, so that we can move the beds open to the more serious crimes. So we would have a defense attorney who would talk to the defendant, see what their situation is, and we would try to work those cases out and resolve them.
Okay. Certainly, Ms. Barr.
So the HUD in its wisdom, has required jurisdictions to have something called a continuum of care. And it's a structure where organizations come together and manage the process of receiving the dollars from HUD and dispersing them in the community. And we have a board. And the whole reason I bring this up is Judge Reuben Green serves on that board of that continuum of care because of his interest with the Veterans Court, because many veterans are homeless, and it's a way to work then with the organizations that might be able to help those folks that are coming through that court.
Okay.
And Judge Green also works very closely with Must Ministries, their veterans program. It's very interesting when our case managers assign a goal and then tell the accountability court what that goal is. It's a different consequence if they don't do it in Judge Green's court and when they don't do it with their case manager. So we're very thankful for those partnerships with the accountability courts.
Okay, all right. Well, can members of our audience assist the state court to acquire more accountability courts? And if so, how can they practically help?
The issue, yes. The issue, at least with our mental health court, has been providers. We've had several attempts at it, and the providers didn't see their value in it. But we're continuing to work with that, and hopefully soon we'll have all that resolved.
Okay, well, I hope somebody's out there watching that may be able to help with that process. Great, thank you. Can you sort of paint us a picture of just the demographics in Cobb of a homeless population? Are you seeing mostly men? Is it women with children? What are the current trends that you're seeing?
While Jerry's looking at our official point in time count, I can tell you what we're seeing at Must Ministries because it's a very unique demographic shift. So every day someone signs in at our Elizabeth Inn. We turn away approximately 200 to 300 persons a month. The majority of those persons are women and children. I have been following a trend for the last 3 years, the same 3 months, during the transient period of the summer when children are free and families are moving around a little bit to see how many people we've turned away. And so this particular summer, we turned away 488 unique individuals from our Elizabeth Inn shelter. Of that group of people, 38% of them were children. Now, this was a 3% increase over last year, the number of children we turned away. 34% of them were women, and 28% of them were men. And so we are seeing a need, and this goes back to what Camilla has said, when the affordable housing is being depleted, the stock from our county, what they're impacting are these single women and their children who have no place to turn. And sorry, this is something very near and dear to my heart. Yes, all of our hearts. We have to come up with a solution to help these families that are experiencing homelessness, the shifting demographic we're seeing.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else want to weigh in on that particular question?
As she mentioned, I'm looking at our point-in-time count. This is another thing that HUD requires of those of us that receive HUD dollars, is to do a point-in-time every 2 years, right? And we do it in January. And we all get together and go out in the community and do this point-in-time. And in the shelter bed program, we have 151 beds in the county for shelter. 63 of them are individuals and 88 of them are families. And in our transitional housing programs, we have 134 beds in the county. 78 are individuals and 56 are families. In our permanent supportive housing programs, we have 446 beds. 87 are individuals, 21 are families. Actually, 113 are VASH individuals, that's the veterans, and 225 are VASH families. On a year-round basis for the rapid rehousing that she was talking about earlier, there are 42 units, and 7 are individuals and 35 are families. So that kind of gives you some idea of the breakdown as well.
Well, and you bring a great question, Ms. Barr. I was going to kind of lead to this next, because obviously the topic is homelessness, which begs the question of homes and where people live. So when you're in Cobb County and you have a situation where you're homeless, what are your options? Where can you live? What do your particular agencies offer in terms of housing options?
We have a program designed to help families that have those children in the school system to find supportive housing. United Way funds assistance to get people over the hump. They may be somewhat housed. They may, like I said, be living in a hotel or a motel. So we have a very small gap that we fill. We don't have sheltering in Sweetwater. We could certainly use more shelter beds. We can use more transitional housing. You know, there's always a great need, but that's a small gap that we feel is for those families. If you are a single person or a family that maybe doesn't have children, school-age children, you know, we have to refer to all these other agencies and hope for the best. But it's hard and can get just as choked up over it because it's very difficult when you're looking at someone and you have no resources for them. And you don't even have a good referral because you know how many people are already standing outside in line to get into the few numbers of beds that there are. So it's tough. It's just tough.
I'm sorry, can I jump in? So this is going to sound strange from a provider of a shelter, but I don't really, shelter beds are not the answer. I mean, the families that we come into contact with want to be living in this community. They want their own homes. And we really have seen, for us, we've only been open since 2014, we've seen an increase in numbers over 10% each and every year of families contacting us asking to get into our shelter. And we're on track again to beat that number of 738 this year alone. So when it comes down to what's available, jokingly, I love the home improvement shows, Flip That House and all of those other great things. I'm a junkie. But they have had an impact. That whole idea of using older housing stock, being able to invest a little bit in it, flip it for a large profit. People are looking at that housing stock in a way that I think has changed profoundly, and that's starting to impact our numbers as well. People who might have been interested in renting those properties are no longer interested in holding on to them and are selling them for profit. We've had a lot of great employment growth, but with that, our private landlords definitely feel that there's an increase in rent. I know I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record, but this is something we talk about all the time. I know I talk about it with the other providers because I think from our perspective, this is not the place that we can have the greatest impact. This is really where we need the greater community to come in and get involved and really look at this issue of where are a large portion of Cobb County residents, sort of where are they on the spectrum of income? My case manager has a great saying that she says to our families that math doesn't lie. So if you have income along these numbers, and that means that 30, 40, 50% of your income can afford this much rent, how much housing stock do we really have available rental-wise for those families? Because again, we're talking about a pipeline. If we're only looking at home ownership, what happens to all those people who need to be in the pipeline to get to home ownership? And if we have a low, this is an old supply and demand issue. If you have a low supply and your demand is really high, there is no place for people to go in that interim period. And I really do feel that that's a community issue. That's something we're going to have to address. It's not really the purview for us.
There was a question from one of our audience members about tent cities. And I guess you probably need to define what they are, but the question basically concerns in regards to tent cities, we basically are having these because we don't have enough space. How do we address this? You want to tackle that question?
I'll jump in. I know it's a very touchy situation, and I see this all across the state of Georgia, and communities are dealing with it over and over and over again. And I think what it is we have a lot of people in these tent cities who have, the truth be known, have mental health issues. And a lot of them, their life has been spent living this way. This is all they know. And when you're a social worker and you've come up along, it's kind of hard to take somebody out of something that's all they've ever known and force them into something else that they're not familiar with. So I think one of the reasons why we have the tent cities is because our providers are doing the best they can to try to help keep these people who are residing in these tent cities safe and out of the elements. There's also been known, and it's been told to me by some of the people who live in the tent cities, that some of them even have mayors. They're really quite resourceful. They have mayors that stay there during the day, watch the tent city while the people in the tent city go to work. And then they come home and the mayor is paid, out of the funds that they receive from their jobs. So whether it be day labor or whatever, and I think that it's in Savannah, we're working with the community down there who is really taking a very forward look. I have someone who's approached us to look at another community and see if we can help with this community, because it's not Cobb County, because there's a lot of issues going on there, but the tiny houses and the tiny house communities. And I think that's definitely something that we're going to have to start to look at. Because what we're trying to also do, so many people, we're trying to take a person or family or an individual and make them adhere to what we think their housing should be and where we think they should be residing. And that's really, if you look at it, that could be working against us in a lot of ways, because what we've got to do is start asking them and looking at what they're accustomed to, what they want. Like, I may think someone needs to have a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage, but they'd be just as happy with a 2-bedroom apartment, and that just knowing that they can pay their rent on a monthly basis. Or I did have a gentleman call me years ago talking about wanting to and he was making a lot of sense. And this is before we all started talking about tiny houses. He was saying, why can't I go over and buy me why can't somebody help me buy a storage unit over there on Cobb Parkway for $3,000? And if I can find a place to put it, that's all I need. That's all I need to live in. That's where I will be, happy. So I think us as a community, and I was born and reared in Cobb County, so I can say, I'm one of the old hats here, that I think it's something that we as a community are going to have to sit down and start looking at and thinking about what makes sense. We've got to start asking these folks what makes sense. And then we also have to accept the fact that in some of these communities now, we're receiving phone calls from older people, living in these communities, that are becoming afraid, because we do have gang activity coming into these communities now, and they are feeling unsafe because they're being robbed of their Social Security checks and so forth. So it's a complicated situation that we've really all got to start having a very frank conversation about.
Okay. I appreciate you giving that answer. What can be done to increase the amount of affordable housing in Cobb? Many people work in lower pay scales, and there's almost nothing available that they can afford. How do we address that?
That's the $64,000 question. That's what every one of us ask every single day, is how can we work in the community to have more affordable housing? Actually, when I talk to a lot of elected officials and I talk about affordable housing, what they hear is affordable housing for teachers and policemen and firemen. They don't hear affordable housing for service workers, for the person that is working at McDonald's or is working at the restaurant, or who is the maintenance person or the housekeeper at any of the hotels. We need to have places for all of our citizens to live in order to have a thriving economy. a lot of times these families can't afford to live anywhere in our community, and they don't have transportation to get to the job. So they show up late, they miss work, they lose their job. It becomes a vicious cycle. That's a $64,000 question. How can we have affordable housing? And my feeling is it needs to be mixed. I don't want to see us go over here and build this whole area over here, and that's where all the poor people are going to live. I think that we need to have folks mix or disperse around the community, because I think then a certain element of the community then becomes role models for another element of the community. One of the things that I talk about with for the families that we work with is we think, well, why don't they know this, or why don't they know to do this with their kids, or why don't they know to do this with when they clean their apartment? They don't know because they've never seen it. You can't be what you haven't seen. And so if you grow up in a community or in a household where you aren't exposed to things, there's no way you're going to be exposed. So we've got to figure out a way, I think, to work with that at the same time that we're looking at affordable housing. And when I talk about you can't be what you can't see, if you'll think about professional folks, think about in football and baseball and basketball, a lot of those families, the kids are in the same profession because that's what they've grown up in and they know that. Look at celebrities. You end up having a lot of celebrities have their kids become celebrities also because that's what they've grown up in knowing. Look at politicians. Sometimes you have families of politicians because that's what they've grown up in and that's what they've known. Or you have lawyers or doctors, or that's what they know. If you aren't exposed to that, you don't know that, and you can't look to achieve that.
Okay. Well, I think a minute ago, Ms. Barr, you had mentioned several different classifications of housing, I think like permanent supportive housing, things like that. Okay. What is the difference in those things? I mean, can you just kind of give a sort of a layperson's difference between those types of housing?
Sure. So as Ms. Barr said, we have the community continuum of care here in Cobb County that MUST participates in, and so what we kind of see it is that our emergency shelter, which MUST has a 72-bed emergency shelter, is kind of that first entry in, and I think there's an importance to it. It's not where they need to land, but a lot of them need a few days to try to figure out, well, where am I going to find housing first of all? How am I going to save money for down payments and those things? So that is kind of what emergency housing at the emergency shelter is used for. Try to connect them to income, connect them to resources, and get them moving very quickly. The program is about 30 days. From there, Cobb County offers a program called Rapid Rehousing. The Center for Family Resources, Live Safe has those dollars, MUST Ministry has those dollars. And what those dollars do, a wrap around the family again, because one of the crazy things when you start to think about it, when you have to come up with first month's rent, last month's rent, your gas deposit, your electric deposit, your water deposit, you're looking around at least somewhere between $3,000 to $4,000 just to get into a door of an apartment unit. So what that Rapid Rehousing program does is provides that assistance for all of those deposits, sticks with them. We run them a little bit differently, each program. Some stay with them for about 3 months, some will stay with them 6 months, some can stay with them a little bit longer, and they will help them make housing affordable, so that the client will be paying a percentage of their income towards their rent, and the nonprofit will make up the difference, and then step them down so that at the end of the program, they're able to self-sustain on their own. The county then from there has a program called tenant-based rental assistance, and a couple other agencies have those dollars, MUST being one of those, and that is modeled after the Section 8 program. And so it is a longer-term program, and it again is made to make housing affordable. Well, here's the problem with rapid rehousing and tenant-based rental assistance is that we get, MUST Ministries, for example, gets a grant on an annual basis. It is a decent-sized grant. It's $150,000, but if you look at the number of people who need that assistance in Cobb County, that $150,000 covers about 10 to 15 households a year. We can make housing affordable for 10 to 15 households a year. And so we need a little bit more of that into our economy. So then from there is the more intensive program that I mentioned before. It's for those that no matter what they do are probably never going to be able to be stable. And that's permanent supportive housing. And those are the ones that are chronically homeless I was talking about before, that have some sort of disability. It could be mental health. It could be a physical disability. It could be a substance addiction issue. For our veterans population, a lot of them are returning with PTSD. It's interesting to watch our veterans population change, because when I first got to MUS just a few years ago, we had an older veterans population. And now as all these young men, and most of them are men that are coming into our programs, are returning, it was an average age of 60. Now we got an average age of like 26 in our programming. And so what we need to do, is find some long-term solutions. And we have a veterans case manager. He is a veteran himself in the armed forces, and so being able to give them people that they can relate to. And so I started thinking about the things. I don't think I answered your question, but the main programming that we have is permanent supportive housing for those that are really at the most need, the rapid rehousing, which assists with those deposits and helps them get stability, tenant-based rental assistance that really truly tries to make that housing unit affordable, where that family is only paying 30% of their income, because we know when a family is contributing about 30% of their income, they're going to be able to sustain with all their other bills and responsibilities that they have. And then we have emergency services.
Okay, thank you. I think you did answer the question. Thank you very much. With respect to the criteria that your agencies have, are there certain things that you require a participant in your program to have in order to be eligible? Some programs say you must be referred by another agency to come to us. Some say you must be drug and alcohol free for X period of time. Some say you must have a job or be looking for a job 20 hours a week. What criteria do you have in your different agencies or groups towards the people that you are able to work with to assist that are homeless?
What we like to say is you have to be ready, willing, and able. So if you are ready to make the changes in your life and willing to make those changes in your life and able to make those changes in your life to become self-sufficient, then you're a family that we would work with. At the Center for Family Resources, you have to be a resident of Cobb County for more than 2 months. You have to be able to work, be willing to go look for a job, participate in job training to learn to get a skill so that you can get a better job. But the real key is ready, willing, and able. And that is then looks at the folks that need supportive housing, we would then send over to MUST or to some other organization, because they're not ever going to be able, because they need to have that support going forward. So that's probably the easiest one for us.
Okay.
You have others too. I mean, you have.
I need an hour to tell you the different eligibility requirements for every single program we have, but every program has its unique set of eligibility requirements.
Okay, all right.
And ours is, you obviously have to be homeless. Our definition of that is pretty expansive. You have to have a child under the age of 18. You don't have to be working when you come into our program, but we do expect you to have the capacity to work within 30 days and willing to comply with the program. So I think we have probably a lot less restrictions than a lot of our other programs. And again, most of our funding are private dollars. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, back to the question beforehand about what we can do about affordable housing. You can see that this is an itch I just have to keep coming back to. I think there's 2 things that I would love to just get out there tonight, and that is one, I would love Cobb County to look at from its comprehensive plan standpoint, which really has a focus on home ownership, to think about, again, what that pipeline looks like. How do we get people who are here, who are working, who are employed through that pipeline if we really want to focus on home ownership? The other thing that I think that I've seen as I've had these conversations is that there, again, seems to be pockets. KSU, I know, launched a program with some of their architects and engineers to get some of the most creative ideas that they had on actually designing affordable housing. And, we've got not only KSU here in Cobb County, we've got some great schools. I would love to start pulling in lots of different partners to this conversation because, again, they have a lot of great stuff to talk to us about how to increase that stock of affordable housing, how to rehab our stock that is aging out with those landlords and with those owners who are no longer interested in providing that service, and being really creative about what it looks like here for people who are living. Sorry, you can go back to the question about eligibility.
Okay, all right, thank you. Another question was asked is, if someone is arrested and discovered to be homeless while in the penal system, are there programs to help them out while they're in, or they're currently incarcerated so that there's some better outcome for them once they get out?
Unfortunately, no. it- Certainly, we've got county partners that we can work with, but I think in a general sense, the criminal justice system doesn't have those. We're not there yet. We need to work towards that, but we're not there yet.
Okay, all right. Also, do you know, Mr. Morgan, do you work with the Cobb PD? I guess, do they have a approach that you know of if they deal with homeless person they might encounter in the community? Like, for example, maybe, one officer might, pick up a homeless person and bring them to a shelter versus somebody else who gets arrested. Do you know, like, are you aware of how that process plays itself out, if you're able to speak to that?
Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm sure there are situations where officers will do that, but I'm not personally aware of that.
Okay.
I'd like to address that a little bit, in that part of the problem is whenever they normally would pick someone up, most of the shelters, the intake process has shut down, so there's no place for them to take them other than to lock up. And I think that there's a big gap there because of that, and there's not much of a resource for them unless if it's during the daytime. And the couple of people that we've had at our office, that when the police have come, basically they had mental health issues, so they were transported to the hospital. But that was, the only place that we knew at that point in time.
Well,
for
and I
them.
think you bring up the transportation issue, and that's a great point. Do any of the agencies, or are there services in the county government where they actually go out and pick up persons that are homeless and bring them into the shelters, or bring them to places where they can receive those services? And sometimes those people may need to have the need at 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, as a for instance. Are there such services through the agencies or through the county government structure?
We do have the TAPT programs that are through mental health that I know work very heavily in Fulton County, and we have called upon them in Cobb County as well. However, their definitions of a mental health crisis are very specific, and it has to be a very, very difficult, it has to be a situation where where other persons are at risk, or the person that is having an episode is at risk of harming their self. Now, we had a case in Atlanta where they were called out, the team was called out, and there was nothing that they could do because, excuse me, this is not funny, but because the woman was running around naked with her clothes off, and they didn't feel like that was an episode that they could do anything about. So we have a provider down there that's saying now, ooh, I don't know that I want to serve any of your clients anymore, if they're gonna, have an episode like that. So it's a real touchy situation, and mental health is working with us all, and we're trying to work on that situation and to have more teams. However, right now, we're all dealing with, and everybody here's, all the providers here are dealing with the fact that we're all looking at a 25% cut in funding coming down from Washington right now. And so the providers, any of them that receive that funding, are scrambling to try to figure out how they're going to make up that 25%. And I guess one thing that I look at and I want to say tonight is, in knowing that, we advocate on behalf of the providers that ultimately it affects our homeless persons. And one of the things that I want to say, right now we've got some terrible things happening all around this country. We've got FEMA that is gone broke, is in the red terribly. We've got just, they're needed in so many places right now. And I know that everyone is hearing on the news right now that you need to make a donation to the Red Cross, to the Red Cross. We can't forget our providers right here that on the front lines in our county that are dealing with things on a daily basis. Because I will tell you, as I experienced from Hurricane Katrina, we will have an influx of people coming into our county, additional people who are going to have need. And our providers need to be geared up to be able to help meet these needs. So that's something that I just have to lay out there and said I was going to lay it on the table tonight because I'm very concerned about that.
Okay. Well, you raise a good point. Obviously, we talked a lot about government programs tonight, whether it's HUD or the state or whatever. What are the kinds of resources that you can go to, that you can approach, that you can ask money from that aren't government sources? Who are these people? What are these entities out there that help provide that additional resource?
I think the only entities that we know of would be the faith-based community, and some of them will take on, people will help pay for rent or whatever. And then we have like Sweetwater, some of our organizations that are strictly funded by the community that have decided not to accept any government funding. And we're seeing more and more of them doing that because of the stipulations that are being placed upon them. We've lost a lot of our transitional housing because of that, because we can no longer have transitional housing. It's going away. And they have to begin functioning on a housing first model. So we have a lot of programs that are struggling right now that have lost half of their funding. But if it wasn't for the communities out there stepping in and helping, we would have more beds disappearing than what we do right now.
Are any of the providers here, are faith-based in nature?
We're completely faith-based, although we do get some private, non-faith-based funding, but it is pretty much private funding. And they're very faithful, and they're very faithful in hard times. When we had the bad floods of '09, every non-faith-based group that was out there, they were really struggling with being able to not do as much because of the tax on the resources, where we were able to actually do more because they did see the need. But you're absolutely right, Catherine. We have already at Sweetwater Mission started serving folks that have come from Texas and Florida. Already, we're seeing almost every day folks are coming, and they're coming to stay with relatives, or they're coming to stay in a motel, or they have nothing to go back to. And we still have permanent residents that are here. They came from Katrina, and they're still with us. They live in our communities now. So we do see a lot of those folks, and they need assistance. And of course, there's not much to go around. But yeah, the faith-based community has its own set of struggles. Churches are struggling, paying their own bills. The dynamic of the church has changed. The support for the church has changed, but it's a gap, and we do what we can, but there's never enough resources. There's only enough need. No shortage of need.
Yeah.
But I think we can all say that times have changed and funding is cut, and I see it in a lot of agencies that we would always refer to for certain programs that are they're not able to do it anymore.
So I wanted to jump in since I do sort of represent 22 faith-based congregations here in Cobb County, from Christian organizations, Transfiguration Catholic Church, St. Catherine's Episcopal, to Temple Col Emeth, Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Our individual donors in our faith-based community have been frontline providers in meeting the need with people. I think they've been really great. There has been, I think, a little bit of disconnect. And so it's been great, I think, as more of them have come to the table to understand what providers are in the county and ways that they can start to partner with them and collaborate a little bit more. But I do want to sort of piggyback on that. I mean, I know that our community is facing a reduction in federal funds and funding, we always sort of need more funding, but we need more funding in response to the fact that we have so much overwhelming need. And I think I mentioned before, you know, we're very small. We only opened in 2014, but we have seen people ask me all the time about marketing, and I say I don't really need to market. I mean, we have so many applications, we don't know what to do with them. Mostly for, you know, if we have an opening, we have anywhere from 4 to 10 families, all viable candidates for that one opening. And so while we would love to have the resources, again, whether those are federal dollars, individual donations, more collaborations, just across the spectrum, again, I would love to see us sort of shift to that pipeline of housing, affordable housing, and really how we stabilize the entire community and not focus so much on the emergency, immediate, short-term need, because that's not really the best thing for our community. People want to be living here in homes for a longer duration of time, and we're just having a hard time making that a reality for them.
Okay. All right. Certainly.
Additional funding. So all of us get funding from a variety of ways. You've got federal dollars, state dollars, local government dollars. You have individuals, you have businesses, you have corporations, you have faith-based organizations, you have foundations, and then many of us do lots of special events. That's just a variety of ways to raise dollars to be able to serve our clients. And as we're talking about the federal dollars being reduced, this is probably a good time to talk about the county is considering not funding the nonprofits in this year's budget, and they're going to vote on it Friday morning and eliminate all the funding for nonprofits here in Cobb County starting October 1, which is going to decimate a number of us. Those dollars for us are unrestricted, so that means so many dollars we get, someone says, I want to give you this money, but I want it to go for X. And so to get unrestricted dollars that you as an organization to decide how to spend is extremely important. Also, the money that we get from Cobb County can be used for match. Match means that when you get federal dollars, the only way to get X amount of federal dollars is have a certain percentage of match dollars to pull them down. We get about $1 million of federal dollars, but we wouldn't get them if we didn't have our county dollars to be able to match, to pull them down. So losing those dollars, if the county votes on that on Friday, is going to really hurt our organization as well as probably everybody up here.
So the losing the county money is almost like a force multiplier because you lose that match.
It is definitely a multiplier.
Okay. I don't think people realize that the county does, in fact, provide monies out of the budget. Does it come from a SPLOST? Does it come from the general budget? Do you know where?
Yeah, it comes from the general budget. Because I'm the one that's been here the longest. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, we didn't have the process that we have now that I'm not going to go into and describe. It was individual, and each organization would go to the county and say, would you fund what I'm doing? And the county then would decide, the city manager or the county manager and the commissioners would decide which agencies to fund. And that was at the very beginning. And I can remember back, as I said, in the late 80s, early 90s, Jim Miller was the county manager. And I went to him to start the process of asking for additional dollars because we were already receiving some dollars from the county. And he said, you know, Jerry, right now, these dollars that we spend at the county level come from federal revenue sharing funds. And I think those dollars are going to go away. So what I'm going to do when I work the budget this time is put them in the county budget in the tax digest so that we can protect you as nonprofits because you never know what's happening at the federal level. Now here we are in the county budget not being protected anymore.
Okay. And you said that meeting is on Friday morning?
That meeting is Friday morning at 10 o'clock. If anybody would like to come and have a say about it.
Okay, all right. And where is that meeting?
Here,
Okay, in this space? Okay. Another point that we probably need to address too is about this idea of jobs. And of course, as you all know from typical experience, when you go to a job, you get in your car, you drive to a place of where you're having an interview, a nice building, you put on your power suit, your power dress, whatever, and show up with your folder and your nice printed resume on some wonderful heavy stock bond paper. But what do you do if you're a homeless person? Because a lot of those resources are not available to you. So how do your programs help them with that process?
Must Ministries on our, and by the way, we are a faith-based organization.
Okay.
But we have on our Elizabeth Inn campus an employment services program that is specific for those that are either in our Elizabeth Inn campus in our shelter program or those living outside of the shelter. And so that program provides a myriad of different services. It does some training programs for flagging and for how to be a restaurateur. I don't know the name, Serve Safe, that's the training for it. It provides all kinds of training to make them work ready. It also gives them all the equipment they need. So if you're getting hired in a restaurant, we're going to make sure you have your first pair of non-slip shoes. If you're going to get a job as a flagger, we're going to make sure you have your steel-toed boots, or a construction worker, your steel-toed boots, so that you are completely ready to go and join the workforce. We also have a team there and computers available to do resume development, so they can help you come up with a resume. We also have volunteers there who will go through and do your mock interviewing with you to get you prepared. Everyone who attends what we call our back to work class will leave that class with bus passes for up to 2 weeks, and then also will receive an interview suit, or dress, whatever selection that they make, so they have the attire to go into the community and do those things. Right now, we're making sure, because the world is changing, that they all leave with a little flash drive, so that if they happen to be anywhere else, they can have that resume ready and at their fingertips. We're giving them that nice leather faux leather binder, so they can keep some copies of their resume at all times with them, so that they're prepared to go into the workforce. And so it's interesting, because we talk about that homeless client that's living outside of the shelter and on the street. But it's interesting to know, in our point in time count, 20% of those that were living outside were working. And so it's very important to note that, that population is working, and they want access to a telephone where they can get calls for interviews and email. And so we provide so they can have access to all those things.
Okay. All right, thank you. One of the questioners asked, if you're trying to assist someone who is in need, what is the best approach or organization to call? Is there a collective list that they can contact?
Well, at Georgia Alliance, we're available Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. till about 4:30 p.m. And that's because that's all the funding that we have, because our staff are doing dual duty. But someone could contact 1-877-540-4671, and or if anyone has access to a computer, they can go to our website at www.gahomeless.org. And on that website, we have a drop-down bar that we have all the providers across the state that have been mapped, and all the organizations, and there's a map that will pop up. You can go to that map, and on that map, you can click the county that you're in, and then you can do a search for the providers of homeless services. And we also try to link people with the mainstream service providers. We work very closely with the state departments of mental health, vocational rehab, Department of Education. We're partially funded by Department of Human Services. Was where we receive so we're very connected with them as well. So there's a broad spectrum of providers on that list.
Okay. I think we're about to wrap up, and I hate that because I think there's so much more we could cover tonight's program, but as you can see, time does fly. What we like to do, though, is we want to end sort of on a positive note, and one of the things we want to do from each of our panelists, if you'll take just about a minute, because I think the folks here at Cobb TV might flip our power switch off here if we get that time here. So I want to make sure that just take about a minute, if you would, just kind of leave the audience. We want you to tell us in your respective areas, all six of you, what is something that you want the audience to know about homelessness that they did not know before they got here, And also, what is something that they can do individually to try to address and help that problem as it exists here in Cobb County among us? Mr. Morgan?
I think that they can volunteer with one of these great organizations. I don't think they will turn anyone away that is willing to help and be a volunteer, whether it's stocking a pantry or whether it's helping check people in. I think they would do that, and I think that would be an awesome thing to do.
Okay, well, thank you.
With Georgia Alliance, I just gave you our 1-800 number. Have people call us. We'll be happy to help link them with the services. And then we've just received seed money from our United Way to start and kick off our program. It's called Georgia Always Provides. And we're going to be gearing that program up, and we're seeking, applying for some additional dollars to get it going. And those dollars are going to be used to help serve the people that are the hardest to serve, that don't fit in anybody else's, what I want to say, mold of client. So, and we're seeing more and more of those, the hardest to serve out there. So, and I would like to say, if anybody would like for us to come and speak to your organization or to your community, to your neighborhood, and let us help work with you on facilitating some discussion and dialogue, we'll be happy to do that, because we have a speakers bureau that's ready to go out and do that as well.
All right, thank you. Ms. Barr?
So you asked what folks might have learned tonight that they didn't know about homelessness. And I think one is the number of homeless children right here in our school system, because I think folks are pretty surprised that there's over 2,000 kids in our school system, that a great number of folks that are homeless are children. I mean, we only see families that have children in the household, but there's a lot of kids that are homeless, and that a lot of the homeless work and they have education. I mean, both of those things I think are somewhat a surprise to folks to learn that. If you're looking at how can folks help, Barry's right, volunteering is good. Giving in-kind donations like food and clothing and that kind of thing is great. Money is the most important piece that makes the whole world work for all of us. Making donations would be the biggest contribution that folks could make.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Duke?
Jerry's right. The face of homelessness is not what most people think it is. So they need to be aware that it could be, you know, the child sitting beside your child at school. The mother waiting in the carpool line may not have a home to go back to. They may be sleeping in that car. It is a different view, and people need to be aware of that. They need to try to understand that, and they need to care. And I think one thing that they can do to help is to get involved right in their own communities. We have a lot of local task forces and improvement coalitions that right there in your neighborhood, find out what's going on the street behind yours. You know, what is happening in your community? There are homeless people living within a rock's throw probably of where you live, and you would not know it. And you need to find out. Just get involved, start asking, get to know your local county commissioners, talk with them, find out what they know, because they need your input. They need to know what you know and what you see. So get involved. Just know your neighbors, know your community, and care.
All right, thank you so much. Ms. Castillo?
I would just say that know that the homeless person is anyone. It's your neighbor, you know, and so to take that away, that again, that same message that we all truly can be just one small step away from homelessness with some of these medical emergencies, or, you know, a pregnancy or a death in the family or anything can cause someone to slip into homelessness, and to be consciously aware that it is not a choice. It might be a choice for a very, very small population, but for the majority of the persons, this is their situation in life that they are battling, and they are battling to overcome what they have been dealing with these last few years. So I would say, you know that about the homeless population. And if you heard something tonight, if you heard something that touched your heart, something that surprised you, don't keep that new knowledge to yourself. Share it. Share it so that we can spread the message of homelessness and how we can help.
Thank you so very much. Ms. Morrell?
I'm really going to be piggybacking on a lot of what was said here. One of the reasons why I think when I was invited to sit on this panel, and Trish mentioned seeing if one of our graduates would come in and speak about their experience was I wanted people to look into the face of someone, one of their neighbors, and hear her voice. And it was very risky. She's employed here in Cobb County, but I wanted people to have that chance. We, the members of Family Promise, the volunteers of Family Promise of Cobb County get to see those faces all the time. And she's not the only teacher that we've had in our program. Whether medical assistants, waitresses, I think the overwhelming message is these are the people of your community, and you are brushing up against them each and every day, and they need your help. And there are really great ways that you can help. I think, again, joining the conversation about affordable housing and that pipeline, whether that is through contacting your commissioners, coming to the meetings, and just being aware of how much this community has changed, and how many people are sort of being left out from being able to stably stay here. And for us, because we are a network of congregations, we would love for your congregation to think about joining us, especially if you want to add another sort of local mission or local volunteer activity. And so just contact us through our website at Family Promise of Cobb County.
All right. Well, thank you to each and every one of you on our panel. I think we've been very fortunate as a community to have Mr. Morgan as well as the members of our community here that help work with service providers as advocates for the homelessness issue here in Cobb County. Thank you to our members of the audience here, both live as well as on TV and also online. As you can see, this is an issue that's very important here in Cobb, and I think you've heard some great information and also some very practical ways to get in to help. So that you can help make this better for your fellow Cobb Countyans. So thank you so very much, and of course, thank you as always.